So let's talk about this now with the Hill columnist Kristin Tate, the Spectator editor-at-large Ben Domenech. Thank you both for being here. Kristin, let me start with you. Biden administration says Title 42 is over, but they're really going to crack down on illegal immigration. Do you buy it?
No, this is offensive to every American who loves this country. I mean, the Democrats, they've had years to prepare for the lifting of Title 42. We all knew that this was going to happen, but they did nothing. They sat and they watched as millions of migrants continued to stream into this country and cartels continued bringing drugs in that continue killing waves of Americans. Right now, Jerry, there are up to 700,000 migrants coming into this country. For reference, that figure exceeds the population of Boston, Massachusetts. You cannot continue to essentially import new U.S. cities into this country and not have any consequences. Here in Texas, we've already been dealing with those consequences. I live in Houston. This is not a border city by any means, but we are already dealing with overcrowded schools. My friends with kids in the school system say there are so many students that the teachers can't handle it. Many of them don't speak English. The crime, the gang-related crime and the drugs are everywhere, and the hospitals are completely overwhelmed. I was at the ER a couple weeks ago. It was a wait time of hours. The staff, the doctors, they don't know what to do. So for anyone who says that this is just a Texas problem, they are wrong. This will be the fate of every U.S. city in 5 to 10 years. Every city is going to become a border town, essentially.
Ben, what's the solution here? As I say, I mean, America's always been a welcome place for immigrants, always, for immigrants seeking to come here, fleeing persecution, or people who come here with great talent and ability and have contributed to this country. Right now, we just seem to be utterly in a situation of utter chaos where the border's open, Title 42 is lifted, all those things that Kristin just described, and yet we don't have any kind of a rational immigration policy. What's the right answer?
Well, the right answer to start is to enforce the laws that we have, the ones that we already have written and that are not being enforced under the Biden administration. The truth is that if you rewind and you look at the immigration challenges that we faced back in the 2000s, when I worked briefly in the Bush administration and then was on Capitol Hill working for Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who's obviously still there, when these guest worker issues and issues related to that were being discussed. At that point, the migration was completely different. It was seasonal. It was primarily about economic migration, where people wanted to be able to cross the border to come and work and then go back home afterwards and to send money back to their families. That's not what we're seeing here. What we're seeing instead is the cartels essentially turning human trafficking into a massive profit machine, one that is, taking essentially everything that the people who are coming can afford to pay in order to transport them, and also demand that they work for the cartels frequently on the other side, selling illegal drugs and that obviously are flooding our cities and that are killing so many Americans, especially younger Americans. The solution, as I see it, is to enforce the law as written on the border. When it comes to these migrants, they should not be allowed to come here. We should not be accepting them. We should be turning them away. And we should recognize that our systems are not built, as Kristin just said, to take on this level of population to handle the burden of taxes and of the kind of support state, the kind of welfare systems that are built to serve Americans first in terms of our interest.
All right, Donald Trump's back in the news again this week on the receiving end of another legal setback, and of course strutting his stuff on the television stage. We'll talk about that next.
Our country has gone to hell. It's very sad what's happened in this administration, and it's something that will turn around on day one. Our country is dying. Our country is being destroyed by stupid people. Our borders are bad. Our military has been bad. You look at the taxes. You look at inflation. Drill, baby, drill. These stupid fools ended it. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
Will you commit tonight to accepting the results of the 2024 election?
Yeah, if I think it's an honest election, absolutely I would.
There you go. Of course, former President Donald Trump was back in his element this week at a CNN town hall meeting, pulling no punches and rallying his base supporters. This after a jury found Trump liable for sexual assault and defamation in the E. Jean Carroll case against him. So what do the legal troubles mean for his ongoing campaign for re-election? Let's ask Ben. Ben, if anybody thought that Trump's multiplying legal problems would act as any kind of a constraint on his political prospects, they have to think again, don't they? If anything, from the evidence we saw this week, he seems emboldened, stronger than ever, and as far as the polls suggest, enjoying considerable support in the Republican base.
Absolutely, and I think that that's one of the reasons why the reaction to CNN choosing to hold this town hall from the left and from media critics was just so ridiculous and over the top. Their fury that they would speak to the leading candidate for the Republican nomination for the presidency from one of the major parties is just absurd. And of course we should speak to him. Now, the thing that I do think, though, is that you saw kind of the problems that could emerge in this town hall for Trump, namely that he has pulled back again and again into conversations about 2020, about January 6th, about tweets that he sent in the past. He pulled out the tweets out of his jacket to read them and point them out, leaving out, of course, the one about Mike Pence not having the courage to do the right thing. But it was one of these situations, I think, though, where you saw him in his element, and if you are a supporter of Trump, you have to look at that scenario and say, no guy punches the media or infuriates them as much as this guy, and that's the reason that people like him.
Yeah, he does. That's absolutely true. But, Kristin, as Ben says, so much of his focus is on 2020 and the supposed injustice and the grievance that he continues to hold about that. Don't voters want to look forward, don't they? I mean, I didn't hear anything in there other than that he's going to solve the Ukraine war in a day. I didn't hear anything from Trump this week that's about how, making America great again, about what he's actually going to do for the country. It's all about him and 2020, isn't it?
I think that's true when you're talking about moderates and kind of winning a general election, but I'm not sure I agree with that when you're talking about a primary and getting the base rallied, right? Trump really did steamroll that CNN host. He had moments where he was quite funny. What I found odd about the CNN town hall, though, Jerry, was that they billed it as a GOP town hall and they stocked the audience with supposedly GOP voters, and yet nearly all of the questions that this host asked were questions that only Democrats would care about, like about the Jean Carroll case or about January 6th. If CNN actually wanted to move the needle in a Republican primary, they would have asked questions that conservative voters actually care about, like why didn't you fire Dr. Fauci during the pandemic, or why didn't you actually build the border wall that you promised? But hey, at least it's a big win for CNN. For the first time in years, they got good ratings.
But Ben, shouldn't voters care about the fact, the man has been found liable in a court of law for sexual assault. By the way, something he denies that specific instance, but as we saw from his deposition, he basically says, yeah, he kind of does that sort of thing all the time, and it's just expected of him. Shouldn't voters be concerned about character?
Well, I certainly think that one of the things that's going to happen going into this election is that people are going to point to that case, point to that result, and use it to try to keep down Donald Trump's numbers among suburban women voters. That's something that they have, tried to do in the past. They were successful at it, obviously, in 2020. They're going to try to do it again, and I think that he has unique challenges on that front in terms of winning those voters back, which is exactly why I think your point about, looking at what he would actually do if he was returned to the White House is ultimately key. That's the kind of message that he needs to have in order to win those voters back. And look, he had 74 million people vote for him last time. There's some percentage of those voters who might not come back because of those issues if they consider them to be a significant drag on him. But I think that for most people, they've made up their minds at this point about whether that's an issue for them or not.
Is disqualifying. Yeah, okay. The U.S., meanwhile, is bracing for the impending debt ceiling crisis as Biden and GOP leaders postpone another meeting with no deal in sight.
They're literally, not figuratively, holding the economy hostage.
The House made sure we wouldn't default. This is too important issue to play political games with.
The debt showdown continues as President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy postpone their meeting that was planned for Friday until sometime next week. The White House claims staff members are continuing to work on potential negotiations, although denying negotiations, of course. This as the U.S. faces a national default as early as June 1st, the repercussions of which the IMF claim could be catastrophic for both this country and the global economy. So let's talk about this now. Kristin, the White House insists it's not going to negotiate. It continues to insist no negotiations. We've got to get a clean debt increase. The House has obviously passed a bill that would actually increase the debt limit while doing something about the out-of-control deficit that we have. Are we headed for a default here, do you think?
No, they're not going to default. The Republicans will cave and the printing presses will start up again, and it will lead to more inflation. It will lead to higher interest rates, and then it will end up hurting the stock market. And we could see ourselves in a situation like we were in the 1970s under Jimmy Carter, where you have a recession and high inflation, essentially the worst of all worlds. This is where the Democrats are steering us. And as we come up to the next election, of course, they're going to blame the Republicans for this. And you know what, Jerry? They are partially right, because the Republicans will cave like they always do.
I'm interested, Kristin, you think the Republicans will cave? Because actually they do seem to have, for a change here, actually got themselves into a relatively strong position. They have passed this bill. Democrats look like the ones who are being unreasonable because they're saying, no, we're just not going to negotiate. But you actually think that, once again, Republicans are just going to have to give in?
I think they will. I mean, I hope you're right. Donald Trump said during the town hall that, if the Democrats won't agree to some massive spending cuts, that the Republicans should let the U.S. default. And he has a great point. I mean, our leaders are spending our money like drunken sailors, and it's got to end. Right. Eventually, the whole house of cards collapses.
Let me bring in Ben. Do you agree, Ben? Do you think Republicans are going to cave? We're going to have just another clean debt increase? The U.S. debt will just grow and grow and grow?
I'm a little more optimistic than Kristin. I understand, though, the nature of why she would think that, because it is typical Washington. But this House is held together in ways that's been surprising to a lot of commentators. And I think a big part of that was the willingness of Kevin McCarthy to embrace and to have a good relationship, both with the populist right wing that he has and with a lot of moderates who got elected in this last cycle, including a lot from New York. That's something that I think has put him in a much stronger position than this White House certainly expected. And when it comes to the cuts that they're demanding, I mean, keep in mind how small these really are. All we really are doing is going back to the spending levels of 2022, right. And that sort of thing. So I actually think that there is a possibility here that Republicans hold the line and get some actual things out of this White House, because I think the White House doesn't know what to do with a McCarthy who's turned out to be smarter, along with the rest of his leadership team, than they perhaps expected.
Yeah, with a very narrow majority, he's clearly managed to pull off something that most people did not expect. Anyway, California, it seems, is one step closer to handing out reparations to its black residents to the tune of $1.2 million each, potentially. But who's actually going to pay for this? And a surprising voice has come out against it. We'll talk about that next.
Pay the debt, cut the check, or no reparations, no vote 2024.
If you are running for office, do not think you are going to win your election if you don't have a concrete plan for reparations.
California voters are sending a message to their lawmakers as the reparations task force approved billions of dollars in payments this week to be handed out to black residents in atonement for this country's past injuries committed against African Americans. But Governor Gavin Newsom shocked his progressive followers by not fully endorsing the proposal, saying, quote, "Dealing with that legacy is about much more than cash payments." Well, let's see what our panel think about this. Ben, what's your view here? This is potentially opening the way for enormous transfers, fiscal transfers to lots of people, by the way, lots of people who have to pay for this have nothing to do, have no responsibility for slavery themselves. And some of the beneficiaries are not actually even descendants of slaves. And how does this make any sense?
Especially in a state like California, the overwhelming proportion of people who are there, who live in California, have no connection to slavery whatsoever. Their families, weren't even here in terms of being here at the time of the pre-Civil War enslavement of African Americans. And that's something that I think is absolutely key to understanding how unfair, unjust, and wrong this reparations movement truly is. Gavin Newsom saying this, I think, is him recognizing that he doesn't want to open up the can of worms that would say we are going to charge tax-paying Asian Americans and the like in California to pay for sins that they had absolutely nothing to do with. And I think that you also have the trickle-down element of reparations where, okay, it's reparations for this, well, then how many other things are there going to be reparations for from our history? That's the kind of thing that a wound that deserves to be kept closed and not scratched until it's reopened again.
Kristin, California is often the point of the spear in terms of progressive innovations. Is this going to be something that's going to catch on, do you think, nationwide?
Who knows? Probably if they implement it, it'll start a trend. But I just have to laugh at what a terrible position Gavin Newsom has gotten himself into politically. He tried to pander to the far left by creating this reparations commission stacked with incompetent morons. Now that they're asking for tens of billions of dollars, he's essentially patted them on the head and said, thank you, but that's not going to happen. So now he has the left angry at him for leading them on with this disingenuous initiative. He has moderates who are terrified of California going bankrupt, and conservatives already didn't like him. So he's essentially ended his presidential bid before it's even started.
Characteristically forthright judgment there from Kristin. Well, look, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately, this week. But thank you very much indeed to Kristin Tate and Ben Dominish. I'll be back next week with more commentary and interviews here on the Wall Street Journal at large. Thank you very much for joining us. And to all the mothers out there, have a wonderful and restful Mother's Day weekend. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.